Kazuya is an ugly beta loser who got dumped by his first love for being a shameless simp. His life took a drastic turn after he bought a new girlfriend to hide his loneliness and didn't realize that she started creating his magic stick. It all started on the day Mommy suddenly decided to break up with him because she had fallen for a Giga Chad with a Magnum sausage. Kazuya spent days crying in the dumpster he called her room and kept thinking about all the creepy things he did that likely scared her away. The thought of her lower lips getting rammed by an alpha crushed his soul, so he started looking for distractions online and eventually found a site for renting girlfriends. After looking through a lot of pictures, he decided to cure his depression by paying for love. The next day, he met Chizuru, a smoke show rental girlfriend that instantly gave him stomach butterflies. They went to a restaurant to get some food, but he couldn't stop staring at her plot and thought she really liked him. After she kindly asked for the payment, they spent the rest of the date at an aquarium, where he continued his creepy staring while she watched the fishes swimming. Afterwards, they started heading to the station, so she locked fingers with him before getting there and melted his last remaining brain cells with a warm smile. Once he got home, he looked through the comments on her account and saw that he was one of many shameless simps that got the exact same treatment from her. He gave her a 1-star rating with a really negative comment about how she didn't even know the names of the fishes before rambling about how she toyed with his fragile heart. After looking at what was left of his allowance and remembering his dad's warnings about being financially responsible, he decided to go on another date with Chizuru to get a couple of things off his chest. The next day, she apologized for coming late and asked for his opinion on her hairdo, so he swallowed his already worthless pride to enjoy her beauty. After paying her at the restaurant again, he asked if playing out a script every day wasn't making her feel empty inside. But she claimed it actually made her happy because she got to hang out with guys like him. At a jewelry stand moments later, she claimed they were lovers when the attendant asked, but he said it was a lie. She hid her obvious frustration and said they could be whatever he wanted. They ended up at the aquarium again, but this time she actually knew what most of the fishes were called, and that made him realize that she probably did her research because of the review. He then asked why it was so easy for her to fake an emotional connection, and she tried to calm him down, but the thought of Moni caused him to go off the rails like an emo baby with anger issues. Everyone else started to notice, so Chizuru dragged him out of the aquarium and caught her breath at a corner before demanding to know why he was acting like a lunatic. She then reminded him that he paid for someone to act like they loved him because he clearly didn't have enough self-respect or riz to get a real girlfriend. He realized his mistake and expected her to end the date, but she wanted to stay until the agreed time because she took pride in her work as a lover for hire. Just then, he got a call about his grandma and said he had to go to the hospital, but she still followed him to finish their date. Afterwards, his dad and mom tried explaining to Nagome that she didn't have a spare life stashed away, but she refused to be treated like a vegetable and wanted to know who Chizuru was. After saying that she found her with Kazuya, Harumi asked if she was his girlfriend, but Kazuo quickly reminded her that their negative aura son was incapable of pulling such a hottie. The curious look on Nagomi's face triggered something in Kazuya, so he straight up lied to their faces about actually being in a relationship with Chizuru. They were too stunned to speak and still didn't believe it was possible, so Chizuru took over and said it was all true. Hearing that brought Nagomi to tears, and she immediately demanded to be discharged so she could plan a welcoming party for Chizuru, but Kazuo and Harumi convinced her to stay in the hospital so they could take care of it. After telling Kazuya to walk Chizuru home safely, they both left, and Nagomi immediately asked if they had made babies yet. Kazuya almost choked on his drink, but Chizuru stayed in character and claimed they were waiting for her approval, so Nagomi gave him permission to clap her cheeks. They kept up the facade until Nagomi ran out to tell her fellow senior citizens about their relationship, which caused Chizuru to freak out because her granny was also a patient in the hospital. To keep the truth of her work a secret, they both ran out to escape right before Nagomi got back with her friends. They found an empty room in the hospital and started brainstorming ways to leave without getting spotted. But after Kazuya suggested playing Spider-Man by jumping out the window, they heard Nagomi's voice outside the room. She came in and didn't see anyone because they were both hiding under the sheets and struggling to stay still, after several minutes of getting soaked in each other's sweat. Kazuya's flashlight turned on, and Chizuru made matters worse by squirming to get free from it. Nagomi heard the squirming and thought it was another senior citizen trying to bust a final nut, so she apologized for intruding and left to keep searching. At that moment, Kazuya took a good look at Chizuru and realized that he had the opportunity of a lifetime. but before he could do anything, she turned his nuts into butter and pushed him off the bed. Just as she finished calling him stupid for thinking he even had a shot, her granny showed up, and they both struggled to come up with a lie to cover it up. Just then, Nagomi also came back, and they both realized that they were going to become in-laws. Kazuya realized that the story was getting out of hand and decided to come clean, but Chizuru stalked him and claimed she was also excited to see that their grandmothers knew each other. After keeping up the facade while Nagomi and Sayuri talked about their relationship, they went to a bench outside, and he apologized to Chizuru for starting the lie. She said it was cool because it wasn't the first time a client wanted her to meet their family, and he used the opportunity to tell her about Nagomi and the struggle she faced maintaining the family business after his grandfather passed on. His relationship with Mami was meant to be his way of making Nagomi's dream for him come true, but she refused to meet his family before the breakup. Chizuru then told him not to beat himself up about it, so he made a promise to get himself an actual girlfriend instead of paying washed-up actresses for fake love. The shade he threw caused Chizuru to reset his brain with her bag and start another argument about the value of her work, so he apologized for being an over-emotional simp. After they agreed to tell their family that they broke up, Chizuru told him to call her if he ever needed a fake date to feel better about himself. The next day, he saw Mami with her new man and wanted to get swallowed by the earth, but his nerd friends gave him some confidence, so he decided to start a new chapter in his life. Then, a girl dropped some of her papers, and he froze when he saw that it was Chizuru. After being frozen in awkward silence for a minute, Chizuru grabbed her things and immediately walked off. Kazuya's friends asked if they knew each other, but he denied it, so they left, and he started heading to class while praying that he had just imagined the whole thing. The next moment, she pulled him aside and started threatening to make a whole jar of peanut butter with his balls if he told anyone about her side job. She then explained that she also kept it a secret from everyone at school, so they wouldn't treat her like Mia Khalifa, and told him not to even think of renting her again before leaving. He gladly agreed to forget about the whole thing and thought that would be the end of it until he tried to take out the trash from his place later on and realized that they were actually next-door neighbors. She immediately ran back in, and he tried to talk to her, but she thought he had become a love-struck Jeffrey Dahmer and told him to stay away from her. Moments later, he tried to enjoy his food stamp dinner, but then Nagomi called to check on him, and he thought it would be the perfect time to tell her that he broke up with Chizuru. The next moment, she told him to call Chizuru over to his place because she wanted to drop by and see them together. After she hung up, he freaked out and deep-cleaned his dumpster apartment before realizing that the truth about Chizuru would cause Nagomi to fall apart. He went to Chizuru's door to beg for her cooperation for one more day, but she refused and told him to consider actually finding love so he wouldn't have to lie about everything. Moments later, Nagomi showed up and asked for tea before getting seated and immediately demanding to know where Chizuru was. Azuya got up and faked a phone call to her before stepping out and posing as a delivery boy to get Chizuru to open up. He stuck his head through the door and risked getting strangled to beg for her help. She brutally rejected him again and kicked him away from the door, so he went back to keep up the charade because he just couldn't handle coming clean. Several minutes later, Chizuru had started making dinner and went to her balcony right as Nagomi figured that she had probably broken up with Kazuya and blamed him for it. She expressed her disappointment over the fact that he had only ever brought smelly weebs back to the house and said Chizuru was a ray of hope that his aura-draining personality definitely couldn't handle. Kazuya gave it some thought and knew she was right, so he decided to come clean about everything. But then Chizuru came in with the meal she made and apologized for being late. Before she could finish her statement, Nagomi rushed over to thank her for not dumping her worthless grandson, who immediately started thanking Chizuru for saving him. After spending the rest of the evening with the two of them, Nagomi got into a cab and promised to get them married to each other before leaving. Chizuru started heading back to her room, but Kazuya stopped her and offered her money in exchange for another date. She then asked about the day he used for visiting Nagomi and only agreed to let him rent her for an hour so Nagomi wouldn't see him for the rizzless loser he really was. Days later, he busted a fat one to a picture of Mami before heading to school and bumping into her on the way in. Her beauty scrambled his brain cells and left him unable to speak, so she helped him get his book back and left. He kept staring at her drumsticks until his friends showed up and started teasing him about all the cultured things Mami was likely getting up to. After Chizuru walked past them, Yoshiaki told him to try dating other nerds for once so he wouldn't get his heart crushed again. Moments later, Moni was walking through the halls with two friends that kept roasting Kazuya until she gave them a weird death stare. Later that day, Kazuya thought of her and tried to play with his flashlight again, but the bell rang, so he went to the door and saw Chizuru waiting for the hospital appointment to see Nagomi. On the way there, she said they had to start meeting somewhere away from their apartment building to avoid any issues with her agency. She then asked for the payment and switched to her lovely side before enduring another charade of love for Nagomi. On the way back, she held hands with him as part of the act, but then Yoshiaki saw them and started asking questions. After taking a closer look at Chizuru, they started begging for her forgiveness and thought Kazuya was trying to kidnap her, so they pulled him aside for an interrogation until he said she was actually his girlfriend. The shock temporarily paralyzed them, so they took a minute to make sure it wasn't a dream and worshipped at Kazuya's feet. They then pulled him aside to ask if he had clapped her cheeks yet, so he said they were saving it for a special occasion, but they told him not to even think about it because smashing a hottie like her would ruin his taste forever. They then invited Chizuru to join them for some drinks, and Kazuya accepted before she could even respond, so they dragged her along. On the elevator ride up, she demanded to know why Kazuya had no problem lying so much, so he explained that Yoshiaki knew Nagomi and would tell her if he found out about the rental thing. She reluctantly agreed to keep up the act to protect both of their grannies from the truth and made him promise to use the breakup lies soon before joining the boys to head to the table. Things quickly got awkward when Kazuya saw a few familiar faces before locking eyes with Mami. Yoshiaki immediately apologized for not realizing that she was also going to show up, but it was already too late, so they all sat in awkward silence until Mami finally broke the ice and claimed she was completely over the mayor of Lanesville. Kazuya felt the last shred of his dignity vanish and went to the bathroom because the thoughts of Mami getting her cheeks pounded had activated his baby carrot. When he got back, he saw her trying to make small talk with Chizuru and joined, thinking it was a harmless conversation. But then she started talking about how he had no self-control or shame when they dated and asked Chizuru how she was putting up with it. He buried his head and wished to be isekai'd, but Chizuru wasn't one to be disrespected and scolded Mami for talking shit about him. Moni claimed it was their usual way of talking, but Chizuru kept scolding her, so she begged Kazuya to explain things on her behalf. The simp lord got up and told Chizuru it wasn't that big of a deal, so she got tired of fighting for him and left. Moments later, they all left, and he took a minute to think about how stupid he was, but then Mami showed up again and scrambled his brain with her beauty. She let him lean on her shoulder and kept his hand just above her melons to completely shut off his ability to think straight. And it worked because he couldn't hear a word she was saying until she asked if he wanted to see her place. He got surprised and asked about the guy she was dating, but she said the whole thing was a lie to make him feel jealous. Just then, a text came in from her brother, so she canceled the plan to take him back to her place and crushed his cherry-popping dreams instantly. The thought of finally getting to clap her cheeks kept flooding his mind until he started feeling the effects of all the beer they drank. He had just finished throwing up when she caught up and asked if he was okay, while flashing her plot to make him even more sick. After she gave him some water, he realized that letting another guy clap her would crush his soul, so he asked if she wanted to go to his place instead. The surprised look on her face made him start to stutter, and he ended up yapping about how he was still addicted to staring at her plot. After the words came out, he expected a slap, but she gave him a pat on the head and said it was cool. He realized that he had been placed in the zone of no return and regretted not standing up for Chizuru. But then Mami got up and asked how he was able to put up with someone so hot-headed. She kept making Chizuru sound like a bad person until he finally found his tiny balls and told her to stop. She tried playing the victim card again, so he confessed to still having feelings for her but still made it clear that she couldn't talk about Chizuru that way. She tried to apologize, but he immediately ran off and felt weird for finally standing up to her. But he also couldn't stop thinking about Chizuru and went to her place. After a couple of minutes of ringing the doorbell, she came up the stairs and he apologized for letting Mami disrespect her. She said it was cool and reminded him that he was paying her to be there in the first place. She also didn't expect him to be over Mami yet, so he told her about what happened after she left and started crying about how much of a simp he was. She said there was nothing wrong with still having feelings for her because it meant he really cared about the relationship. She then suggested continuing the rental thing so she could keep him company on the days he would feel too lonely. He got emotional and tried to get a hug, but she pushed him away and said it wasn't that deep. That weekend, he was on the way to the beach with his friends, but he kept looking at the car behind and asked Yoshiaki if Mami was really cool with him being there. Yoshiaki then told him that she was the one who suggested inviting him and asked why he didn't bring Chizuru along. He said she had something important to do, but in reality, he was too broke to afford another rental date. When they got to the inn, he locked eyes with her again and started coming up with a plan to replace his fake relationship by getting back with her. Meanwhile, she was also coming up with a plan to separate him from Chizuru, who had also just gotten to the beach with her friends. Afterward, Kazuya was doing some research on how to get back with Mommy when she showed up to ask if he wanted a drink and gave him an eyeful of her vanilla buns. After giving him the soda, she sat beside him and apologized for being so insensitive the other night. She then started reminding him of all the dates they went on and the name they came up with names for their future kids. Hearing all that made him feel like he actually had hope, so he tried to tell her the truth. But then Chizuru showed up with her friends, who also knew the girl in Mommy's friend group. He got scared, thinking they would find out the truth, but she introduced herself with a different name and acted like she had just met Kazuya for the first time. After she left with her friends, Mommy kept asking Kazuya what he was trying to say until the guys called him for a game. He went to the men's room after that for his daily self-hatred session and kept stressing over what would happen if Mommy found out about Chizuru until she opened the door. She immediately closed it, but he dragged her inside to ask why she came to the beach. After she said the whole thing was a coincidence, he asked why she said those things the other night. She explained that it was her way of helping him through the heartbreak, so he thanked her and told her not to feel bad about his new plan to get back with Mommy. Hearing that got her pissed, and she kept telling him about how she never actually cared about all that until Mommy called out to him. He went out to see her and she asked who he was talking to, but he lied and said it was a phone call. After reminding him that his phone was still at the table, she tried to grab the handle, and he feared that the secret would finally be revealed. But then Chizuru came out in a swimsuit, and his friends ran up to worship her beauty. Shun was curious to know how she got to the beach so fast because Kazuya said she was busy earlier on, so he made up a story about her being a local resident. While they all headed back to the beach, Mommy continued her murderous Twitter rant and scared off an otaku that tried hitting on her. Chizuru then pulled Kazuya aside and told him to come up with another lie so she could leave, but then Mommy found them and took them back to the table. Everyone started asking a bunch of questions about their relationship, and Kazuya couldn't keep up with the lies, so he snuck off to the water. Moments later, he noticed that a couple of hipsters were talking about how hot Chizuru was and felt bad for making her lie for him again. Just then, Mommy called him to a rock formation to find a bracelet she dropped, so he tried to help her, but she slipped on a rock and pressed up against him before leaning in for a surprise kiss. At the time, one of the girls was asking Chizuru how she was so cool with Kazuya constantly being around other girls, so Chizuru said she trusted him. Meanwhile, he was getting his face eaten off by Mommy. Months ago, Kazuya met Mommy for the first time, and his friends introduced him as a down-bad virgin. He lied about formerly wanting to be a priest as his genius way of hiding his baddie deterrent personality. Days later, he found the courage to ask her out, and she accepted, so he immediately started spamming her over the days that followed to plan their first date. When they eventually went out together, he confessed to not knowing anything about girls, but she told him not to worry because she had also failed to understand boys after her first 2 relationships. She held his hands and promised to figure it out with him, causing his already intense obsession with her to skyrocket. A couple of nights later, she kissed him for the first time and went home while he stood there like a defective android. Back in the current time, Mizuru was confidently talking about how she trusted him while he kept exchanging mouth juices with Mommy until she stopped and apologized for losing control. After telling him to forget about it and act normal, they went back to play cards with the others. But Kazuya was in a completely different dimension and couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. He thought Chizuru's plot cannons would scare Mommy off forever, but the kiss brought his hopes of smashing her cheeks back, and he kept fantasizing about it until Nagomi called him. After complaining about the money she had spent on Fortnite skins, she told him all her tests had been completed, which meant she could finally get back home and come see Chizuru whenever she wanted. On his way back to the table, he kept thinking about finally coming clean and was oblivious to the questions Mae's friends were asking Chizuru until Yoshiaki stopped them. They asked for Kazuya's opinion, and he locked eyes with Mommy before realizing that it would be the perfect time to come clean. He got up and announced the breakup, and Chizuru noticed the chills running down his spine, so she also got into character to make it believable. He was trying to explain that it was a mutual agreement when Yoshiaki dislocated his jawbone with a nasty cross. Before he could finish roasting him for thinking with his wiener, Kazuya got back up and knocked him down as well. As they both kept rearranging each other's faces, Yoshiaki called him a zero IQ nutjob for not paying more attention to Mami's plot cannons despite having Chizuru, who they all thought had chosen to be with him. Kazuya got pissed and punched him back again before revealing how painful it was to get his heart crushed by Mami. The boys held him back so they wouldn't break each other's pearly whites, and Yoshiaki used that opportunity to tell Mami that it was wrong to keep playing with his feelings after she dumped him. Chizuru started heading home after that, and Kazuya also left to use the men's room, but she waited behind a bush to commend him on almost getting sent to the dentist over a fake relationship. He then told her about Nagomi's discharge, and she said Sayuri was also going to get discharged, so they felt it was the perfect opportunity to finally get back to their normal lives. He asked if his pathetic brawl with Yoshiaki made her happy to finally be done with the whole thing, but she said it took guts to defend his truth, and told him to have a little more faith in himself before leaving. Moments later, she saw her friends waiting outside the inn and hid because they didn't know about her side job, but then Yoshiaki showed up to talk to her. At the time, Kazuya was calculating the bill he had racked up for the fake relationship and started wishing he wasn't so broke. On the way back, he thought about Yoshiaki's punches and got pissed again because they didn't know the full story, but then he saw her with Chizuru and got shocked. He thought Yoshiaki was trying to raise her up and got close to hear their conversation, but it was mostly just Yoshiaki telling her about how stupid Kazuya really was. He explained Kazuya's miserable existence in so much detail that even Chizuru almost begged him to stop. But then he said the down-bad numbskull had an abnormal level of optimism that made him tolerable. Sometime in middle school, he toppled over Kazuya's flower plant for a science project and packed up the dirt after being unable to find the flower's seed. Kazuya's plant ended up growing first, and they all thought it was just a weed and told him to dump it. But he refused to listen and kept tracking its growth until it became a beautiful hibiscus flower and got him a gold medal. After saying he had always felt bad about keeping it a secret from him, Yoshiaki told Chizuru to consider taking him back and gave her 2 tickets so they could both get some alone time. Kazuya was in tears after hearing all that, but a dog scared him out of the bushes, so he tried to hide his tears from Yoshiaki, who then wished Chizuru luck and left. After giving him a ticket, she said they had to get on the ferry to at least honor his speech, and claimed that it would really be their last fake date together. When they got on the ferry, she started feeling sick and told him to get Mami back if he really couldn't get over her. She then went inside to rest, and he followed to thank her for everything she had done to help him get better. Just then, his phone started to ring, so he stepped out to answer it while her condition kept getting worse. Mami was on the other end of the line telling Kazuya that she was all alone at the hotel pool waiting for him. While they were talking, Chizuru stumbled to the railing and got dizzy right before the ship hit a strong wave and knocked her off. As the others on the ferry started to gather and described her features to the coast guards over a radio, Kazuya immediately dropped his phone and jumped in after her. He swam as fast as he could and managed to get to her, but several minutes later she woke up and saw him lying unconscious beside her. She thought he was resting and tried to wake him up, but he didn't move a muscle and she started getting worried. She called for help and started doing CPR on him, but it had no effect and caused her to remember everything Yoshiaki and Nagomi had said about him. Moments later, Yoshiaki heard some medics describing Kazuya over the radio, and Mami heard the news from her friend shortly after that. Back on the shoreline, Kazuya was still unconscious and kept seeing flashes of his life while slowly crossing over into the afterlife. But then Chizuru used mouth-to-mouth to bring him back from the dead. He noticed her heavy breathing and tried to say something, but she interrupted to thank him for risking his life to save her. He was more focused on her soap plot and tried to get closer, but the coast guards finally found them and scolded them before taking them back to their friends, who were also mad. Kazuya remembered that he was meant to see Mami, but he first thanked Chizuru for going that far just to save him. She then said it was no big deal since she was his girlfriend, and Yoshiaki started asking if they had made up already. But Kazuya knew something else was up and wondered if the kiss meant something else to Chizuru. She had just gotten some water in the med van and kept thinking about how strong Kazuya looked when he jumped into the water to save her. The next day, Kazuya left the hospital and told them that Chizuru had already gone back home. He then tried talking to Mami, but she closed the window on him and crushed his waterlogged heart. After dropping him off at his place, Yoshiaki told him to patch things up with Chizuru, but he still brought up the breakup, so Yoshiaki punched him again to get the rest of the seawater out, and told him to stop making things overly complicated. He then told him that only love would push him to risk his life like that and wished him luck before driving off. Kazuya got to the stairs and kept thinking about the look Chizuru had after he woke up from his dance with death. He then reminded himself of her true nature and crouched in fear until she showed up and asked if he truly lacked any sense of shame. She immediately went up the stairs, so he followed suit and concluded that her cold attitude meant she truly didn't see him as anything special. Once inside, he got pictures from their time at the beach and thought they were cute until he got a pic of mommy and immediately got ready to make some magic. Just as his fantasies started to get interesting, a memory of Chizuru snuck in, so he took a moment to get his mind back on track before resuming his goon session. For some reason, Chizuru kept popping up throughout the entire session, and by the end of it, he realized that he might actually have feelings for her as well. On his way to college the next day, he ran into Chizuru and started blushing, but thankfully she grabbed her friends and left so he wouldn't do something stupid. He went aside to think about the sudden rush of emotions he felt and kept trying to shake his feelings off. That weekend, he joined his family for a trip to a resort Nagomi wouldn't stop yapping about. Once they got there, she told them all about the buffet and rooms before saying Sayuri was also going to join them. Just then, Sayuri showed up, so he asked why she was also there, and Nagomi told him the trip was actually their way of celebrating the hospital discharge. He thought Chizuru would also be there, but after looking around, both Nagomi and Sayuri didn't mention her name, which made him feel a little better. Sayuri then gave him the key to his room, so he left them to enjoy each other's company and got on the elevator without realizing that they set him up. Moments later, he got to his room and found it open, so he went in and thought the previous guests had just left. He was trying to get settled in when Chizuru came in with her melons about to pop out and immediately stormed out of the room. After telling him that she was going to give their grannies a piece of her mind, she got into the elevator and threatened to rip his little Johnny out if he tried to follow her in. Sayuri and Nagomi told them the rooms had already been specially prepared according to the plans they had made and asked why they had a problem staying together since they were dating. Chizuru claimed it was an issue because they had still not clapped each other yet, so Sayuri and Nagomi told them to stop acting like priests in training and get on with it. They ended up back at the room, wishing for some miracle to change their fates, but after a few minutes, Kazuya took a good look at Chizuru's plot and realized that the arrangement wasn't so bad. She also got tired of being hateful and decided to enjoy the trip by soaking up in the bath, but Nagomi was already there and almost gave her a heart attack. Moments later, Nagomi was washing her back and used the opportunity to size up her milkers before also checking to see if her snail was tight enough to get the job done. After the weirdly intense PDF activity, Nagomi told her the trip was also a day she used to remember her late husband and said she was happy that she got to spend it with her. Chizuru then asked if Nagomi would still feel the same way if she turned out to be a liar, but Nagomi said she would keep loving her even if she was a worm. Afterwards, she got back and agreed to enjoy the rest of the trip before actually finding a way to keep herself amused, while Kazuya felt like a cursed object that drained the happiness from hotties like her. He picked up his futon to sleep close to the door so she would have space, but then she stopped him and said there was nothing wrong with sleeping in the same room. Moments later, she took her contacts off to get ready for bed, but he kept thinking about sleeping next to her and thought she wanted to tutor him in the art of baby making. The thought of her milkers caused him to enter a state of cultured hypnosis, so Chizuru brought him back with a brutal kick to the guts. After scolding him for lacking self-control, she told him about her black belt and threatened to sue his entire family until they were homeless if he even dared to come close to her. Several minutes later, they both turned in for the night, but while she was already deep in Snoozeville, he was up thinking about the look on her face that day on the beach and what Yoshiaki said about his feelings towards her. After sitting up and watching her sleep, he realized that she was way more mature than he could ever dream of becoming and genuinely wanted to know more about her. He then asked if they really had to break things off because he had felt something change in him after the ferry incident, and he wanted to know more about it. He knew it was wrong for them to keep lying about everything and promised to tell everyone the truth if she really wanted him to, but he begged her to keep up the charade for a little while longer so he could learn more about himself. After the rant, he thought she was still asleep and tried to get tucked in, but she responded and turned over to say that it was cool since the entire purpose of her job was to help clueless nerds like him learn to be better people. She also said that the lies would have to stop very soon and told him to focus on being good enough to actually find a good girlfriend. The next day, they told the rest of the gang that they were back together, and Yoshiaki tried to be happy for them, while also hiding the crippling sadness of his own depressing loneliness. After classes, they went to a cafe so Chizuru could set up the ground rules for their arrangement, and said she would continue charging him the usual fee to maintain her job credibility. She then asked if something happened to his phone, so he told her it cracked during the ferry incident and said it was nothing to worry about since it still worked. Moments later, he regretted that statement after paying the bills for the day's date and asked for a discount, but she totally ignored the request and said she had to get home. Just then, Shun showed up and asked about their date, and they said it was just a casual hangout, so he suggested having a double date with his girl. Kazuya was shocked to hear that he actually had a girlfriend, but before he could ask any more questions, Shun set up the double date and left. On his way home, he kept thinking about Shun's escape from loneliness until someone bumped into him. He tried to yell, but her plot froze his brain, so she covered it up and called him a creep before running off. That night, Shun sent him a text about bringing sportswear for the double date. A few days later, they met up for it, and he told them they were going rock climbing. He then went to get his girl, and Kazuya kept thinking that she would have to be a cave woman to settle for someone like him until he came back with Ruka. He immediately recognized her from the other day and asked about it, but she played it off like it was nothing, and Shun also made it sound like no big deal. Moments later, they were all inside watching Shun demonstrate how he survived in the wild before his parents adopted him. Chizuru went next and quickly got the hang of it, but Kazuya saw that rock climbing really made her dump truck active and realized that it was why Shun suggested it as a date idea. When Chizuru got back down, Kazuya went for his turn, but the years of endless jerking with baby oil had made his hands permanently slippery. Thankfully, Ruka was even worse and made him feel better about himself. After Shun helped her up, Chizuru offered to help her, so Kazuya watched with Shun and asked how he managed to bag such a hottie. Shun asked if he was trying to cheat, but Kazuya said he was just curious to know how his beaver face attracted Ruka, so Shun said it was all about being an alpha. He went to check on Ruka, and Kazuya started thinking about how far he was from ever becoming a true alpha. Chizuru tried telling him how fun rock climbing was, but he was deep in self-hatred, so she sat beside him and said there was nothing wrong with being a total simp for someone he really cared about. She then offered him a drink and said he didn't have to take it, but he immediately snatched it out of her hands and thanked her for it. She got back up and told him not to get the wrong idea about her kindness before Ruka asked for a moment of her time. After going up the stairs, Ruka said she knew Chizuru was a rental girlfriend, but she played dumb, so Ruka walked off. Chizuru immediately went to tell Kazuya, and he freaked out, so Chizuru started trying to come up with something to do if Ruka actually knew the truth. Just then, she got back, and Shun went to use the men's room, so Chizuru went to tell Ruka that their relationship was legit. Ruka then told her to kiss him as proof, and they both started to stutter from the shock. Ruka said she had heard about the ferry incident and how close they both appeared to be and asked if the whole thing was just a sham, so Chizuru started walking over to kiss Kazuya. After covering his lips with her fingers and hiding behind her phone, she said it was done, and Kazuya's love paralysis definitely made it believable, but Ruka refused to accept it and asked why they were faking it. Shun finally got back, so Kazuya came up with a story about Chizuru having to see her grandma, and she quickly cinched up to his lie before leaving. Kazuya then walked home with both Shun and Ruka to find out how she figured out the truth. After they walked past his station, Shun asked why he was still following them, so he lied about missing their time together and kept walking with the both of them until they got to Ruka's stop. When Shun only waved her off, he got suspicious but thought she was just not ready to kiss his beaver teeth. Shun also had somewhere else to be, so he left, and Kazuya immediately went down to follow Ruka, but she had been waiting to bust him the entire time. She said his stalking proved she was right and turned to leave, but he kept trying to stop her, so she turned to face him and got her milkers juiced. After smashing his skull with her bag, she cussed him out and ran off, but he kept following her and begged her not to tell Shun the truth. She stopped to say that she never planned on telling him because she had found out about the rental thing and just wanted to mess with them. He then asked how she found out about it, but she refused to tell him, so he begged to make a promise to keep everything she knew secret from anyone else. She asked why he cared so much since the usual otakus that rented girlfriends never really cared, so he told her about everything, but that only made her more creeped out. She ran off again and tried to dodge an old lady, but that caused her to start falling backward, so he rushed to save her and ended up breaking the fall with his body. She pushed him away and tried to leave, but he stopped her and told her the truth would affect Chizuru, which was something he didn't want because he truly thought she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Ruka then told him that she found out because she was also a rental girlfriend. Afterward, he met up with Chizuru to tell her, and she got pissed about it since it meant Ruka was likely with another agency and thought it would be fun to mess with her work. After finding her information on an agency site, she told Kazuya that they had to continue playing dumb to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Kazuya then thanked her for coming out to talk even though he didn't pay for her time as usual. She got red-faced and said it was just to figure out what Ruka was up to before leaving. Moments later, he went to campus to wait for Shun in case Ruka had already told him everything. The next moment, he heard people talking about Hadi and saw Ruka, who then called out to him like they were old friends. Just then, Shun showed up, so Kazuya pulled Ruka into a class to ask what she wanted, and she demanded a hug. Before Shun came in, they hid under a table, and Ruka used the opportunity to wrap his arm around her while checking something on her phone. After Shun left, he asked Ruka why she was being so reckless, but before she could explain, Shun caught them and asked why they were together. Ruka then thanked Shun for renting her out for the double date and crushed the last shred of dignity he had. After telling Ruka to leave, Kazuya chased after Shun, but he eventually lost him and went home to tell Chizuru about it. They had barely gotten into the conversation when Ruka showed up and said Shun once told her where he lived. She had also heard Chizuru's voice and asked if they were neighbors, but he kept trying to change the subject so she would stop asking questions. The next moment, she pulled out her phone and swore to keep everything secret on the condition that Kazuya would go out with her. He asked if she was tweaking off the lean, but she claimed that his way of taking care of Chizuru, who was only a rental girlfriend, had made her develop feelings. He was still struggling to wrap his head around everything when she got even closer and said she wanted to be loved by someone like him. He got lost in her rice cakes and milkers until Chizuru came out and said there was no point staying hidden since she already knew everything. She then told Ruka that their fake relationship was born out of circumstance and said her proposal was going to be a lot for Kazuya to process. Ruka then said he definitely had enough time to process since he didn't have any trouble fondling her melons the other day. Chizuru lost her and started cussing him out for lacking morals, so Ruka decided to add fuel to the fire by making the staircase accident sound like another one of his cultured attempts on her. He managed to get Chizuru to chill and took her into his place to talk about it, but Ruka followed them and called Chizuru unprofessional because she clearly had no trouble entering his apartment, which meant she had done it before. She then sat beside him and grabbed his arm as her way of establishing dominance. After a few moments of awkward silence, Chizuru told Ruka to give her a couple of minutes alone with Kazuya, but she refused and said Chizuru was probably going to steal him away with her melons. Kazuya also asked her for some time alone, so she accepted and left them to talk. Chizuru then asked Kazuya if he actually had feelings for Ruka. He said the incidents she talked about earlier were mistakes before explaining how wrong it would be to date her after what happened with Shun. She agreed with him and said he should stay away from her, but that surprised him, so he asked about her promise to help him find a girlfriend. She reminded him that Ruka was actually blackmailing him, which meant a relationship with her would probably be covered in red flags. He then decided to go tell Shun about Chizuru being a rental girlfriend and said he would keep her college life separate, but she was worried about the effect it could have on his. He said it would be unfair to keep it a secret from Shun, who was probably somewhere crying, and told her to stall Ruka while he climbed out of the balcony. Just then, Ruka came in, causing him to crack his tailbone before she got to the balcony, and asked why he was trying to escape from her love. Chizuru stopped her from running out and asked if she really had feelings for Kazuya. She said she had been searching for someone like him for a long time before running out. By then, Kazuya was dragging himself across the sidewalk, but she caught up to him and massaged his broken spine with her melons while trying to negotiate with him. He managed to break free and apologized for grabbing her melons before saying he had to fix things with Shun and couldn't go out with her. The next moment, her eyelids started to leak, and she asked why he had such a problem with dating her since he already liked Chizuru. Some local girls started giving him the death stare, so he tried to calm her down, but she kept bawling her eyes out, so Chizuru pulled him aside and told him to accept. Her sudden change of heart confused him, so she explained that doing that would keep Ruka under control, and her tears showed that she actually liked him to some extent. Over the following weeks, Kazuya slowly lost all hope in life because he agreed to go on weekly dates with Ruka and also couldn't go a single day without responding to dozens of random texts from her. To make matters worse, Chizuru had completely stopped seeing him and made him feel like he was truly just a client to her. One evening, he heard her shower turn on and knew she was waxing up her plot, so he busted a fat one and sat in shame after the post-nut clarity kicked in, making him decide to get some space from Ruka. On his way into campus the following week, Ruka ambushed him because he had been avoiding her texts. After frantically looking around, he pulled her aside and begged her to stop randomly showing up at school so Shun wouldn't see them together. She thought it was kind of bogus since what they had was real, unlike the rental dates with Shun, but he said it still wasn't a good look, so she agreed and pulled him up to ask for a movie date. With winter getting stronger, she wanted to spend more time warming up with him, and he didn't completely hate the idea, so he accepted and kept trying to shake her off while Chizuru watched them from a hallway. Her friends eventually snapped her out of it to talk about a sleepover they were planning for Christmas, but she said she already had plans. They asked if it was with a boy, but after she said it was something else, they decided to stop asking questions and went ahead to attend class. Later that day, Kazuya told Ruka that he had made plans for Christmas with his family as an excuse to get away from her, and she thankfully didn't threaten to Unalev herself. He then started thinking of plans he could make for Christmas. Spending it with Chizuru became his first choice, so he tried to book her, but she already had a date for that day. He began to wonder why she even needed to be a rental girlfriend when she could use her plot to deceive simps like you into giving her whatever she wanted. The next day, he finished clearing up his bills and thought it would be a good time to start thinking a way to make some extra money. Just then, Chizuru ran past him, so he followed her until she met up with a hottie named Omi. Thinking she was on a rental date, he turned to leave, but a scary thought suddenly crossed his mind. After turning back and seeing the genuine smile on her face, he realized that there was something more between them. The idea of them actually dating and making babies for Christmas crept in, but he refused to accept it and tried convincing himself it was nothing. He ended up stalking them as they walked together until an old lady threatened to call the cops. He realized that following them around would only make things look bad for him, but he also couldn't shake off his curiosity about Omi. He decided to continue his investigation and followed them into a theater where they got tickets to a movie. Afterwards, he kept sneaking around until nightfall and listened as she talked about making dinner at his place. He finally started to accept that she was off the market and knew they were definitely making babies, so he stopped following and watched them disappear into the crowd. Moments later, he finished clogging the washroom sink with his tears and decided to go back home. But then Omi came in and he got scared, thinking he had been caught. Thankfully, Omi didn't know about his creepy stalking and was too busy having a conversation over the phone. Kazuya listened and got interested when he heard something about Chizuru being warm and sticky on the inside. Omi then spoke about her being the ideal companion and mentioned something about a dress fitting, which made Kazuya a lot more confused. After the call, Kazuya became certain that Omi was trying to use Chizuru's good nature against her and kept following him. Moments later, they were both by a Christmas tree while Kazuya hid by the steps and started to doubt himself. The spirits of his fellow simps refueled his delusions just in time as it looked like Omi was reaching in for a kiss. Kazuya jumped out to stop them but tripped, and Chizuru started demanding to know why he was there. He said Omi was pretending to be a loving boyfriend just to clap her cheeks, but she got confused and asked why he thought they were dating. He told her about everything he had watched them do and said it definitely meant they were together. Before she could think of a way to respond to his creepy obsession, Omi asked if he was talking about the script, but Chizuru told him not to say anything else about it. Kazuya kept asking and almost made her blow a fuse, so she decided to come clean. She said she was an upcoming actress, and the whole rental thing was her way of getting better at it because acting school was too expensive. Omi was also an actor already in acting school, so he was helping her practice lines. Kazuya then asked about the phone call he overheard in the bathroom, and Omi said he was recommending her to a director. Omi then said there was a shoot he had to get to, so Chizuru apologized for Kazuya's inability to think, and Omi left. Chizuru then asked Kazuya if he truly didn't have anything else going on in his life. He apologized before explaining that he got worried and thought Omi wanted to use her after hearing that call. He thought she would start hating his guts for going that far, but she gave him a package and said she also called Omi to help her pick out a phone case for him. Kazuya immediately started to cry and told her it was the first time a girl had given him a present. Bystanders thought she had crushed his heart, so she sat beside him until it started to snow. Days later, Kazuya finished a shift at his part-time job and went home to obsess over the case Chizuru got him. Remembering that she was an actress made his obsession even stronger, and he thought she definitely saw him as a special person. But that was until he read comments from other loners on the agency site and came back to reality. Later on, he went on the usual rental date with her to ask if she thought of him in a special way, and that got her confused. She asked if he had fallen in love with her, but he denied having such feelings. She then told him to stop being so needy all the time and said it would be best to keep their relationship professional. On the way home, they held hands for a bit until they got to their street, where Ruka had been waiting to ambush him and demanded to know if he was cheating on her with Chizuru. After he said they just went out to talk, she dragged him away for a date, and Chizuru watched with no emotion as he cried for her help. Moments later, Ruka fed him some ice cream and tried to make small talk, but he started thinking of what Chizuru said and got lost in thought. Ruka noticed and put a blindfold over his eyes until he eventually got tired and took it off, right as she dumped him in a hotel room bed and took off her jacket. The moment her socks came off, he made a run for it, but unfortunately, she had also locked the door to make sure he couldn't escape. Instead of telling him to pull out his dingleberries, she got upset and demanded to know the truth about his relationship with Chizuru, so he asked why she had to strip just to ask that. After she said it was the only way she could feel comfortable, he sat down and told her the truth about everything between him and Chizuru. Ruka got even more upset and asked why he didn't just introduce her to Nagomi as his real girlfriend, so he said it wouldn't be that easy because Nagomi would see him as a playboy. She then told him that keeping up with the fake relationship was pointless since all Nagomi really cared about was for him to finally have someone he could start a family with. Hearing that caused him to get red-faced, but she made it worse by getting closer and saying she was ready to take every inch of his magic wand. He crawled out of the bed and told her to chill out, but she kept getting close and said it was about time they took things to the next level. He then ran into the bathroom to get his demons under control, and she saw a text on his phone that changed her mood. After using his thoughts of Chizuru to calm down, he went back in to suggest getting room service, but she had already left. On New Year's, he met up with Chizuru, who didn't mind putting on the charade to spend time with his family, but still made it clear that he would be paying for everything. Moments later, Nagomi showed up with his parents, and Chizuru immediately activated princess mode to bewitch her. While they were catching up, Kazuya realized that Chizuru was gradually becoming a part of the family. But then Ruka showed up and almost gave both of them a heart attack. She immediately wrapped herself around Nagomi and claimed to be close to both Kazuya and Chizuru, so Nagomi let her join them and started heading to the hotel. Before going inside, Nagomi asked how she knew them, so both Kazuya and Chizuru came up with a story to make it sound like Ruka was one of Chizuru's old friends. They thought the story would work until Ruka straight up told them she was Kazuya's girlfriend. He immediately said she was just making jokes, but she kept saying it was true. So Nagomi told them all to head inside so she could have a word with Kazuya. Once inside, Chizuru told Ruka to escort her to the little lady's room, while Nagomi kept trying to send Kazuya to an early grave until he said Ruka was a liar. She stopped and believed him because Ruka lying made more sense than believing that a loser virgin like him could pull two baddies at once. Meanwhile, Chizuru was in the washroom trying to scare Ruka off, but she stood her ground and asked Chizuru why she was dragging out their fake relationship when she really didn't have to. Chizuru ended up pinned against the wall and said it was complicated. But Ruka said she was the one making it that way and suddenly started sizing up her melons before asking if she actually liked Kazuya. She denied having any feelings for him, so Ruka told her to stop with the charade because she was actually serious about being with him. Moments later, Ruka joined them at the dinner table and kept yapping about the time she had spent with Kazuya while he and Chizuru struggled to hide their fear of getting exposed. After cleaning his face and feeding him, she noticed the abnormal smiles coming from Nagomi and his parents, so she asked for a moment of his time. Once they both left, Nagomi and his parents went back to normal and praised Chizuru for being strong enough to deal with Ruka's lies. Meanwhile, Ruka had found out about Kazuya's lies and yelled at him before asking why he was going so far to keep up the charade. He tried telling her that Nagomi wouldn't be happy to find out the truth, but she said it had to be done and locked fingers with him to show that she was the one meant to experience his love. Her intensity became too much for him, so he went ahead to rejoin the family for a shrine visit, and Chizuru used the opportunity to tell him that cooking up such a lie would only make things harder for the both of them. Just then, they realized that both Nagomi and Ruka were missing and freaked out. At the time, Ruka had pulled her aside to talk, and Kazuya tried to call, but Ruka stopped her from taking the call to tell her the truth. She started thinking about everything Kazuya told her about the fake relationship and hesitated. So Nagomi said she also wanted to talk to her. She started talking about how grateful she was to meet a friend of Chizuru's and said she had always wanted to know more about her. Watching her talk made Ruka realize that she just really liked Chizuru, so she kept quiet until Chizuru found them. After Nagomi left with Kazuya's parents, Chizuru told him their story was safe and made him feel relieved. He then found Ruka and apologized for lying about her before thanking her for not ratting them out. She then said she knew it wasn't the right time to reveal the truth, but also told him to stop doing too much with Chizuru. He acted like he only saw her as a rental girlfriend, so Ruka promised to keep working towards getting accepted by Nagomi and ran off to find her. At the start of the next week, Ruka started working at his job to spend more time with him and tried to give him a good morning kiss, but he kept pushing her away. She then went to use her charm on their boss to make him reduce Kazuya's pay so he wouldn't be able to afford rental dates with Chizuru. After she left to sink her claws further into their boss's mind, his friends showed up to get a room and made sure he could feel the pain of being a brokey. Moments later, he served them, and Yoshiaki told him that Shun had been skipping classes for a while. He then pulled up a bunch of heartbreak tweets Shun had been posting, and Kazuya realized that he was still going through it after what happened with Ruka. He immediately went to tell Ruka about it and suggested apologizing to him, but Ruka said it was pointless since they only ever went on a rental date. He still tried convincing her to do something about Shun's heartache, but she completely changed the topic to talk about date ideas for the both of them. That night, Kazuya kept staring at his first salary and thought of a responsible way to spend it, but a date with Chizuru felt like the grown-up thing to do. After having a full dinner date in his head, he remembered what Yoshiaki said about Shun and decided to think about him instead. All his ideas ended with the realization that Shun probably wouldn't want to hang out with him since he was part of the reason his shameful truth got exposed. So he came up with a different plan and went to tell Chizuru about it. That weekend, Shun got to a station and wondered why Kazuya wanted to see him. The thought of him smashing Ruka's cheeks sent him spiraling into a fit of rage again, but then a fellow simp got dumped with a handprint on his face. Shun tried texting Kazuya to cancel the meeting, but then Chizuru showed up and said she was his rental date for the day. Hearing her say those words left him stunned, and he thought it simply couldn't be true. So he searched her name on the agency and realized that he wasn't the only shameless simp paying for fake love. He then asked her about her relationship with Kazuya to be sure he wasn't hallucinating, and her expression told him everything he needed to know. He kept trying to wrap his head around everything, but she got tired of waiting and dragged him along for their date. After getting to the amusement park and telling him how she had always wanted to see it, she got them tickets. But all he thought of was why Kazuya went to such lengths instead of just telling him the truth. He thought they were both trying to mess with him and decided to go home, but Chizuru said it wouldn't be nice of him to leave her in the park all by herself, and that activated his inner simp. The thought of other otakus trying to rizz her up just didn't sit right with him, so he tagged along and tried to stop himself from enjoying her company during the first ride. After that, they went to a haunted house, and she kept squeezing his arm with her melons to finish him off. By the time they had finished visiting other stands, he lost all composure and let his true nerd side run wild while secretly feeling bad for having so much fun with her. When they found another ride, her legs also started to damage his brain cells. So he got in and confessed to knowing how stupid it was that guys like him were spending all their money for a fake date with hotties. He kept talking about how childish and stupid it was until she stopped him and said there was nothing wrong with being a boy because his lack of experience made his feelings real. She made it sound like he was doing her a favor by letting her experience his childlike reaction to her beauty, and the sucker actually believed her. He reminisced on their date and realized that Kazuya was really enjoying the times he spent with her. Just after sundown, she asked if there was something else he wanted to do, but he said she didn't need to pretend anymore because he knew the whole thing was Kazuya's plan to cheer him up. Just then, he saw Kazuya spying on them and called him out, so Kazuya met up with them and Chizuru left so they could have space to talk. They both got to a bench where Kazuya told him the whole truth about the girls and thought he was still upset, but Shun just couldn't stop laughing at how dumb he was to have been spending all his money on a fake relationship over the past couple of months. Kazuya eventually got tired of the trash talk and reminded him that the whole date was planned to stop him from probably unaliving himself because Ruka didn't like his beaver teeth. Shun then said it was really cool to watch Chizuru play along like she actually wanted to go on the date. Kazuya said she was probably just doing her best to keep up with the charade, but then she started coming back, so he ran off to let them enjoy the rest of the date. After she caught up to Shun, he asked if she could ever actually catch feelings for a client, and that caused her to really think about it. The other night, Kazuya told her about Shun's depression and said he really wanted to make him feel better, so she agreed to do it, but asked if he really didn't mind getting his secret exposed like that. He then said he didn't really care as long as it could help Shun feel better, and said it wasn't really fair of him to keep such a hottie all to himself. She told Shun that she would never fall for a client, but her expression told him a different story. Later on, Kazuya read all about the rest of the date from Shun before going through his mail and finding a letter from Chizuru to meet up at the balcony. He immediately went into pimp mode and cleaned out his place before getting himself ready for what he thought was a night of endless clapping. Moments later, he went out and saw that she was already waiting to ask him for a favor. She had a friend who had just started out as a girlfriend on the agency and wasn't faring so well with the customers. So she wanted him to take her out on a free date because she knew his lack of balls and experience would make him the perfect test subject. She then asked if he had started anything up with Mommy, but he said very little had happened between them since the beach. After promising to still help him figure it all out, she said the friend was a college freshman to get him excited and went back inside. Sumi was an average, estrogen-lacking short stack who prided herself on being a nerd during the week and an extremely shy girlfriend for hire during the weekends. Her idol was none other than Chizuru, the hottie with a fatty that always seemed to have it all together and had the perfect idea to get her a lot more clients. The next weekend, Kazuya got to the spot for the meetup and saw that she had been hiding for quite some time. She then found the courage to face him, so he tried talking to her, but she forgot how to use her vocal cords. He led the way to start their date and told her to treat him like a living mannequin, hoping it would help her loosen up. Just as they walked past a mall, Mommy came out and could barely believe her eyes when she saw them together. Moments later, they were at a cafe, and Kazuya kept trying to make small talk, but Sumi still couldn't say a single word to him. He then asked if she could try smiling, so she mustered up the courage to fake a smile. But it was the most hideous expression Kazuya had ever seen on a girl's face, and almost made him puke. He realized that she was in the wrong line of work and thought about giving up, but the way Chizuru asked for his help made him think Sumi was worthy of a second chance. Afterwards, he took her to a bowling alley to see if that would get her to loosen up. A few locals kept complimenting her beauty, but she barely noticed while Kazuya saw what they were talking about and wondered why she was so introverted. He hoped bowling would at least get her to talk, and she seemed hyped to try it out, so he expected a good result. Moments later, it got to her turn, but she was too busy staring at a senior citizen like a creep, so he called her back to reality. Just as she got ready to roll the ball, a young pro bowler took his shot and startled her. The fall gave Kazuya a quick flash of her cakes before she covered up and tried to hide how nervous she was feeling. Kazuya saw that nothing he had done was working, so he asked why she was doing the rental thing, but her dinosaur-age brain still couldn't come up with a sentence. He went to get drinks and took a minute to let the tears out until he saw 3 thugs trying to riz Sumi up. He hid behind the wall to avoid getting his face smashed in, but they started messing with her, and he knew Chizuru would be upset about that. So he went in and pulled her away from them. When they got to the elevator, she thanked him for saving her, and he got surprised to finally hear her use actual words. He then said it was nothing to worry about since it wasn't his first time taking a hottie out and suggested trying out another activity. She grabbed his hand and managed to crack a semi-realistic smile before they went into the elevator, without realizing that Mommy had been stalking them the entire time. After getting to the next floor, he couldn't find something to do just yet, so they both got ice cream. She tried stepping way out of her comfort zone by offering him a bite. He could tell how stressful it was for her, so he took the bite and watched in shock as she showed off some next-level tongue skills. Over the next couple of hours, she kept trying out new things and failed horribly at each of them until they got to the skating rink. She didn't start off so bad, so he thought she didn't need his help until she tripped and got her rice cakes exposed again. He tried helping her up, but he also tripped and ended up pinning her against the wall. Her beauty started giving him cultured ideas that technically wouldn't be a problem since she was his girlfriend for a day, but his brain started to leak from the excess spike in activity. So he went to get cleaned up and felt bad for having so little self-control. When he got back, Mommy was sitting across from Sumi, and he almost crapped himself on the spot. He got seated, and she claimed that she saw him while hanging out with a friend. She then asked Sumi how she knew Kazuya. He struggled to think of a good lie that wouldn't expose the truth, but then Sumi grabbed his arm to act like they were actually dating. He wanted her to stop so Mommy wouldn't think he was a 2-timing backstabber, but Sumi made matters worse by locking fingers with him. Mami then asked for some alone time with him, and he gave Sumi the signal to leave. She stepped aside, and Mami started talking about how shocked she was to see that he had become a player. He was terrified the entire time and thought she was going to start asking more questions, but she lied that there was someone waiting for her and promised to keep his relationship with Sumi secret before leaving. Afterwards, he told Sumi that she did really well on the date and assured her of her chances at being a rental girlfriend before heading home. At the time, Mani was in bed wondering how he was already with a second hottie and decided to look up Sumi, but that led to her finding out the truth about everything. Days later, Kazuya met up with the boys, and they finally gave him permission to clap Chizuru's cheeks, even if he was likely never going to get a chance with her. Just then, he saw her on a date with another guy and made them change directions so Yoshieki wouldn't figure out the truth. That night, he got disappointed after not finding another balcony meetup request from Chizuru. But then he heard something and found a pebble on the balcony. She threw another one to get his attention and said she wanted to thank him for taking care of Sumi. He asked if that was all she wanted to talk about. She then told him about her plans to quit the whole rental thing because the director whom he spoke about had given her a role to officially start her acting career. He barely said a word while she kept talking about her plans to focus only on her acting career and said she would still help him out until everything was finalized. After she left, he went back inside and realized that it was all coming to an end, but he still couldn't bring himself to tell her about his feelings and cried himself to sleep. The next day, Chizuru went out for a date with a first-time client that she thought would be perfect for acting practice, but things took a turn for the worse when the client turned out to be Mami. Earlier on, Kazuya met up with Ruka and ignored the simps that all thought he was too ugly to be her boyfriend. At work later on, she turned down another group of love-struck betas who then asked if she already had someone special in her life. Kazuya kept thinking about what Chizuru told him the other night and decided that it was finally time for him to stop obsessing over her. He pulled Ruka aside and said it was time to make their relationship official, but then he saw Mani pass by with Chizuru and watched in horror as they both went into a room together. Mani immediately slid over the payment, but Chizuru refused to accept it, so she put it in her bag. Chizuru then asked how long she had known the truth, so Mani told her about the night she found out and asked for the kinds of things she would do for Kazuya during their karaoke dates. Chizuru told her they had not been to one yet, so Mani told her to sing a song. However, Chizuru first wanted to know why she wanted the date. Mami then walked over and handed over the mic, so Chizuru unlocked her inner Taylor Swift and sang while Mami looked through the menu. And Kazuya tried to figure out what was going on. The idea that Mani had figured it all out started to do a number on him, but then Ruka showed up and pulled him back to the counter for work. After the song, Mani asked Chizuru for details of the dates she went on with Kazuya, but Chizuru said it was against policy to discuss her interactions with other clients. By then, Kazuya's curiosity had brought him back, so he got to the door and pulled it open just enough to hear Chizuru tell Mami that she wanted to return her payment because she wasn't delivering her usual top-notch service. Mami told her not to worry about being the perfect girlfriend and said she didn't really care that she spent her time faking emotions for a bunch of beta virgins who didn't have anything better to do with their lives. She then told Chizuru to stop the fake relationship with Kazuya because everyone at college fully believed that it was real. She also claimed that their fake relationship would stop Kazuya from finding true love and said Chizuru's fake smile was starting to piss her off. Moments later, they both left the store, and Kazuya hid so they wouldn't see him. But then Ruka showed up to find out what he wanted to tell her earlier on. After telling her to forget about it, he went into the back room and knew he had to do something about Mami, so he gulped down half a gallon of water and made himself throw up to fake being sick. He refused to tell Ruka what was actually going on and chased after the girls until he saw them climbing up a bridge. By the time he got to the top, Mani was apologizing for messing with her and promised to keep her truth hidden from the others at college in exchange for the end of the fake relationship with Kazuya. She then turned to leave, but Chizuru stopped her to ask if she had feelings for Kazuya. After she talked about all the things Kazuya said about his feelings for her, Mani asked if she also had feelings for him. Chizuru got blindsided by the question, so Mami went on to say that there was nothing wrong with developing feelings since she had been playing the part for a year already. Chizuru completely dodged the question, so Mami wished her luck and turned to leave. But the times Kazuya cried about Mami came rushing back, so Chizuru stopped her and asked if she could give him a second chance. She kept talking about how he could actually be the one for her, but then Mami saw his jeans and knew that he had been listening. She then pulled her hand back and said her feelings were none of Chizuru's business before walking off, while Kazuya was swallowing his own snot and tears. That night, Chizuru got back and saw him waiting outside his place, but she ignored him and tried to get inside. He then told her that he had followed them from the shop and explained how close it was so she wouldn't think he was stalking her again. She then apologized for not keeping her promise to help him find a girlfriend, but he started getting pissed at himself for always needing her to do the most basic things for his love life. She was trying to suggest having a proper conversation with Mami for closure when he stopped her and said she was the one he wanted. She asked for an explanation, but he chickened out and said he wanted her as his only rental girlfriend and didn't like the fact that she wanted to quit for her acting. She then said the rental thing was definitely going to end so she could focus on her acting. So he wished her luck and went inside to beat himself up for being a wuss while she fell against her door and struggled to understand what she was feeling. The next couple of days went back to normal for everyone in his life, including Mami, who was back on another boring date. Meanwhile, Kazuya was enjoying the time he had left by spending his allowance on rental dates with Chizuru. Will Kazuya ever find enough balls to tell Chizuru the truth about his feelings, or will it be too late by then? That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.